Well, this morning I took a part of a pack of batteries with me, but what do we often find that we use batteries for? For a lot of stuff. For a lot of things. We'll use them in flashlights, and I know in our case, in our home, we keep a couple flashlights on hand, and they've got batteries in them. And on occasion, when the lights go off and we find that we're in need of a flashlight, I can always tell if the batteries are running out of juice because there's a lot less light coming out of that lamp, and it's pretty dim. Now, we also keep a stash of batteries on hand in our house so that we can be prepared for when we do run out, and we do at church too, particularly with kids' toys. And we've noticed that when toys are running and they're full functioning, even if it's like a car with a siren, you can hear that siren going, woo, 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 and it doesn't take too much longer to figure out that a battery's running out of juice when it's no longer going woo, 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 but woo, woo, and then nothing. We have a stash because we want to be prepared. We have a stash here because we want to be prepared. I'm going to put this out there. This is probably one of the worst, or the worst sermon titles I've given a sermon, so ignore the one that's there. We're going to focus really more so on what it means to be prepared and how we might be prepared. And we're going to do that by looking at one more of Jesus' parables today, the parable of the bridesmaids. Let's turn to Matthew 25, shall we? Then the kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 bridesmaids took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a shout, "Look, here is the bridegroom. Come out to meet him." Then all the bridesmaids got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise replied, "No, there will not be enough for you and for us. You had better go to the dealers and buy some for yourselves." And while they went to buy it, the bridegroom came. And those who were ready went with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later, the other bridesmaids also came, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he replied, "Truly, I tell you, I do not know you. Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This is another parable kind of like last week where I'm really thankful we've got a whole bunch of parables and not just that one and this one. And it can be even a little confusing looking at this parable. And I've even heard comments such as this when people have heard this story about the confusion, I guess, that they experience around this parable. Well, I guess maybe God's encouraging us then just to save up and hoard, and to not worry about other people who might be in need. And shame on them. They had as much opportunity and chance to save and get their oil as I did, so it's just too bad that they ran out of oil. Have you ever heard anything like that? I have. When it comes to this parable, I have. And I'm not so sure that's what's going on. And yet I even wonder sometimes when you go back and you start looking where we've been. We've been on this journey in the Gospel of Matthew since the end of December, and we're nearing its end. We have a few more weeks here. But even if we were to go back and start looking at some of the other things that Matthew has shared with us, particularly when it comes to the Beatitudes, you wonder what's going on with this parable. Let's go back, shall we, to Matthew 6. One of the ones that we covered there out of the Beatitudes was this: "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, but store up treasures in heaven." So now we come to this parable, so what's it saying? Okay, wait a minute. Don't store up treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, except, yeah, you do need to store up oil, because if you store up oil, then you're going to have treasures in heaven. I'm not quite so sure. And then a little later in the Gospel of Matthew, still in the same chapter, he's telling us, don't worry about what you're going to eat or drink or what you'll wear, to not be anxious and to not worry. And now we're here again with this parable, and you've got to be wondering, does that mean that we don't worry except for when it comes to oil, that we have to be worried that we have enough oil for our lamps? And there again, if everybody has the same opportunity to get oil for their lamps, well then shame on those who didn't get oil. Too bad, I guess they weren't worried enough or anxious enough about it to worry about having the oil that they needed for their lamps. I'm not so sure about that one either. And then you come to Matthew 7. And Jesus tells us there on the Sermon on the Mount, ask and you will receive, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. Well, I guess it's going to be open if you've had enough oil and you've been prepared, because if you don't have enough oil and you're standing at the door, guess what? The door might not be open for you. And then there's one more in the 7th chapter. Jesus says, do unto others as you would have them do to you. I don't even know what to do with that one when it comes to this parable. I just sat shaking my head wondering, great, now what? Sorry, I still got nothing for you, even when I'm standing here, sorry. But I find this journey that Matthew's been taking us on to be an interesting one, and not even just Matthew. Because if we go back and we look at what the Gospels teach us in general about the way we're supposed to respond in relationship to God and other people, I wonder really what's at the heart of this story and how it might even compare to another story we looked at just a couple of weeks ago, the feeding of the 5,000. Now, for those of you who were here for that story, and I'm hoping most of us here are familiar with it, and if you're not, Jesus is teaching this large group of people. And what happens is, as the day goes on, the disciples notice that it's getting kind of late in the day. There's at least 5,000, according to Matthew's gospel. There are 5,000 men there, not including women and children, so it's quite a large crowd. The disciples notice these people are going to have to travel a long way to get home, and so they say, Jesus, we should probably go ahead and send them now before it gets much later and they're not going to be able to see to get home. And Jesus says, no, don't send them home, you feed them. Now, how is this going to happen when there's a scarce amount of supplies? Okay, this is starting to sound a little bit more like the parable we've got here today. There's a scarce amount of supply. And Jesus does something miraculous with it. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought about it with that parable, but could you just imagine if Jesus didn't do that? And if he would have said to them, okay, yep, I get it. There's people here, there's not going to be enough food. Hey, find out here who does have food, gather them together. Those who don't, send them home to get it. And then we'll have a little potluck supper just for this few who are here. Well, that would be a completely different story. And doesn't fit at all with the gospel message now, does it? This is a parable that can be somewhat confusing, and I think one that we also need to be a bit careful with. So we've got all those stories. Now, let me ask you this. How many of you like to be prepared? And I think there's this way we like to be prepared, we like to plan, and I believe planning is important. Usually what happens in my week, okay, we're all here together today. But on a typical Monday morning, first thing, very early in the morning, I'm right back at it, preparing for the next week's sermon. I need at least that long so that I spend the whole week with the message. Now, something you might not know. By the time we get to Saturday night, usually my sermon's written by Friday, and I set it aside for a little bit, and then I look it back over Saturday evening. some of you know this, but I don't sleep very well Saturday evenings because it's still going through my head. I'm still wrestling with some things, and I'm also thinking about the way this is going to end up coming off as I stand here together with you. Now, some things, there's been a couple of occasions on a Saturday night where I've had this happen to me, and you're going to laugh. I, however, don't think it's that funny. I do now, but there have been times when I have managed to get a little bit of sleep and then wake up dead from my sleep in a panic and sweating like there's no end to tomorrow, and it's not hot flashes. I'm panicking because the dream I'm having, and in this dream, I'm standing here before you, but I've not completely prepared, and I don't know what I'm going to say to you. And I wake up, and I think this is real, and I am literally freaking out. Like, okay, I would hopefully never let that happen, but that dream is horrifying. You know, and I do believe it's important to plan and prepare as much as we can. And I would even say that to people with regard to saving, having a savings account, and even looking ahead to our futures so that we have something saved up for later so that hopefully we don't become an unnecessary burden for other people. Or that we don't even maybe end up being called foolish or be compared to a fool like the bridesmaid here. Now, I don't think I even need to ask that question. I don't think any of us here really want to be called or to be known as foolish, do we? So I want to stop and look here now in this parable at who's involved and what's involved. Because we know in this parable there are 10 bridesmaids. We know that for sure. We know that there are 5 wise and that there are 5 foolish bridesmaids. Here's some things we don't know. Are the wise bridesmaids hoarding and not sharing the oil? We really don't know that for sure. Do the foolish bridesmaids, was it a shortage of time for them? Did they just not have time to prepare? We don't know. Here's something else we don't know. Do the wise bridesmaids have any more oil than the flasks they're carrying with them? Don't know. Or I wondered this too. Do the foolish bridesmaids maybe have a stockpile at home, but they left it there and didn't have time to go back and get it, and they don't choose to carry their oil with them? We don't know. We just know that there's 10 of them. All 10 have lamps. Here's something else that we know, and we might tend to gloss over. All 10 of them get tired and fall asleep. That's significant. All 10 of them get tired and fall asleep. He gets it. So, then I wonder if it has something really to do with the oil. And what is exactly the oil that's being referred to here? Is it simply a commodity, or is there more going on? And here's a situation where I think Matthew's doing something where he's doing a little bit of layering again. So if we go back even to the 5th chapter now, and there's something there going on where Jesus says to the people, you are the light of the world. And do you remember what he says about our lights and where we're to put them? Don't hide it under a bushel, but you put it on a lampstand because it gives the whole house light. And in their context, that was the way they lit their homes. They would rely on the sunrise, they would rely on the sunset. Some would have oil lamps in their home, not everybody did, but then they would light it. Now let me ask you this, if it's going dark and they've got an oil lamp and that runs out of oil, what's going to happen in their house? It's going to go dark, very dark, and they're not going to be able to see. How many of us here Well, I guess, well, what's your oil? What is your oil? For us as Christians, what happens? If Jesus says you're the light of the world and your oil lamp runs out of oil, how are you going to keep going? It's like the battery thing. If you run out of energy, if your batteries run out of their charger, their energy, how is something going to keep going and working? It's not going to. Or if your flasks run out of oil, how well are you going to be shining your light to other people around you if you have no oil in your lamp? And as I started thinking about that as it relates to myself, I think all of us here have ways in which we play a variety of roles, or we wear different hats in life, right? I am a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I am a grandmother, I'm an aunt, I'm a niece, I'm a great aunt, I'm a great niece, I'm a friend, I'm a pastor, I'm a teacher, I'm a mentor. There's ways in which we all wear a lot of different hats and do a variety of things. Now, with all of those hats and those variety of things, there's bound to come a point in time when we start getting tired and run out of energy. And I know when I'm trying to wear and juggle a lot of those hats at the same time, there's times it hits me. And people know, people closest to me know. And what I'll hear, hey, Lynne, especially from those who love me, you think you might need to take a break? Do you think you might have to plug in your charger, your battery charger, and get a recharge? Here's a good one. How many of you have ever been on an airplane before? So you've heard this little speech. Once the cabin is full of people, an attendant will come before you and they'll say, in case of an emergency, take out your seat cushion, it becomes your flotation device, and an oxygen mask will drop before you in front of your face. And what do they always tell you? Put on your oxygen mask before you help the person next to you, because it doesn't take long and you become disoriented and you're not going to be able to help the person next to you. And if I'm running on fumes, how am I going to be able to help and assist my husband, our children, our grandchildren, you, if I'm not plugged in to the ultimate fuel source, or I'm running out of oil, I'm running out of a charge of battery, or I'm running out of oxygen? I think that's one level that's going on in this story. But I also think there's another one. Because as those gas tanks start to run out, there's another problem. Because it's not just those gathered here that I'm closest to, and this comes back to something else in this gospel as well. Do you remember what Jesus said about feeding other people? How he remembers us? When you were sick, I gave you something to eat. Or, excuse me, when you were hungry, I gave you something to eat. When you were thirsty, I gave you something to drink. When you were in prison, I came to see you. When you were sad, I came and I comforted you. How are people going to know? Other people outside of this context going to know if our gas tanks are empty? And I've had that happen. As much as I like to plan and prepare ahead of time, I had an embarrassing moment last summer. A couple of you were in my car when it happened. We had plans to go to a Whitecaps baseball game, and the crowd, the amount of people that were going, continued to shrink. And so it ended up being that one vehicle was going to meet the other group there. And there was some last-minute unexpected changes. I wasn't planning on taking my car. I'm just putting that out there right now. I was not planning on taking my car. I was planning on taking another family member's car. And so I didn't pay that much attention to the gas tank. And we were on the highway going down I-96. Well, lo and behold, the ramp we would have taken to go to Fifth Third Ballpark was closed, so it meant going a little further, and Malone's, we'll just put it out there, Ken and Sandy Malone were one of the couples in the car, and Ken leaned over on the seat, and he saw my gas needle, and he says, "Lynn," he's not trying to sound alarmed, but he said, "Is that really how much gas you have in your car?" I'm like, "Well, whatever you do mean." So I happened to look, and I'm like, "Well, yes, I guess so." And as soon as he said that, the light came on, telling me that I had to fill up my tank. And I said, trying to reassure him, I said, "But you know, it will be okay, because as soon as that light comes on, I know I've got about 35 to 50 miles yet, so we should be just fine." But rather than playing it or cutting it too close, we pulled into a gas station. They were so gracious about it. They were just wonderful. But I thought, I was not planned. I was not prepared. You know, and that happens sometimes where things creep in. We're not planned. We're not prepared. But when Jesus comes and says, "Did you feed those who were hungry? Did you give them something to drink? Did you comfort them when they were sad? Did you visit them when they were in prison?" What will our answer be? Because this is also connected to that other little part about the treasures in heaven and having a good eye. Because when our oil lamps are full, we'll be more inclined to see the things that Jesus sees. We'll be more inclined to hear the same things that Jesus hears. And we'll be more inclined to have our hearts broken with the things that break Jesus' heart. So what is it that fills your flask? What is it for you that charges your batteries? Because yes, we need to spend time in God's Word and in prayer. That's part of it. But I also believe part of the filling comes from being that blessing to others. I don't know if this changes your idea of what this parable perhaps is about. It did mine. And maybe it's time to pull up to the filling station and have a little oil added to our flasks. Because as we serve the least of these and do for the least of these, I think you're going to see that level increase too. And not necessarily as a way that drains and takes away. And that's part of what comes, or the joy that we receive. So when there's that knock on the door, when the bridegroom comes, what will the response be? Because time's ticking. Time is ticking. Would you pray with me?